Hi, Bob.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great today, thank you.
Good. We just have a few questions here that we want to ask you, just to get to know you a bit better. So where and how did you meet your wife, Marlene?
Wow, that's a great question. We went down to Urbana, which was the missionary conference for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And I went from Vancouver and she went from Abbotsford. And we never met in the conference, but we had a number of Canadian students who decided on the day after the conference that we would visit Chicago. And so we had a tour of Chicago. And we visited the mission there, Moody Bible Institute, the provincial building, and all of that. It was freezing cold. And we decided to have dinner together, this group of students. And I had my eye on this young woman that was with us. And we went to a steakhouse. It was sort of under ground steakhouse. And so we there, and I asked her if she would sit with me. And she sat with me. And I learned that she was from Abbotsford and I was from Vancouver. And that was the moment when we connected, we shared. Rest of the day, we didn't care what went on. We just talked about our lives, our backgrounds, what was going on in our lives. And I think at that point, we fell in love with each other. We got back to Vancouver, we connected, and God brought us together. So it was didn't happen in Vancouver, it happened in Chicago at an Urbana conference for missionary conference. So it was cool.
Cool. What's a proud parenting moment for you and Marlene?
A proud parenting moment?
Mm-hmm.
Proud parenting moment was when our son graduated from high school. And I was able to take my camera out into Calgary and take pictures of him in his tuxedo. And the school invited me to come on stage when the young people came across for their diplomas. And I was there to give a prayer of dedication of these young people as they received their diploma, high school diploma. And so he came across and I was able to stand up with him and with the principal of the school as he got his diploma. It was a cool moment, really was a cool moment.
That's awesome. What is your favorite parable of Jesus and why?
The prodigal son. The prodigal son is my favorite parable because I really see the extravagant love of Jesus in that parable. I know he upset the religious establishment with that parable because he was giving a glimpse of the heart of God that was inconsistent with what they were teaching, and they were mad at him. They saw themselves as the older son in that of judgment. And Jesus says the heart of God is for the wayward, for the broken, for those that need, and that's who he is. In fact, from that time on, they sought to arrest him and put him to death. It upset them so badly. It is a powerful parable. It's my favorite parable.
What is your favorite book other than the Bible?
My favorite book other than the Bible? That's a good question. I don't know if I have a favorite book other than the Bible, except maybe Chesterton's book on Everlasting Man, in which he gives a beautiful description of the Christian life. That is a powerful book, which I really think has a lot to say for us today.
What's the most memorable church event you've had?
The most memorable church event. This is a cool one, really a cool one. I came back from Africa after the genocide in Rwanda, and discovered that there were 250,000 child-led households. The African way of caring for orphans was to absorb them into their own community, because communities raise children in Africa, not individual families. And if a parent dies, those children are brought in as adopted family members in somebody else's family. But genocide destroyed all of that. There were just not enough families to absorb the orphans left. 100,000 people were killed in that genocide. So I came home wanting to do something for those orphans and vulnerable children. On Easter Sunday morning, I shared the need, and this is cool. An offering was taken, $50,000 on a Sunday morning. And as a result of that, we were able to match it. I had a person give me $110,000 after that. The denomination matched it, and we were able for the next 15 years to provide care, education, advocacy, medical care, and food for children in Africa in 3 districts in Rwanda as a result of that.
Wow, that's amazing. Knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself when you first started ministry?
Oh, knowing what I know today, one, I had a really passion to start ministering. I would say that looking back at it, I would say that I know some of my colleagues had bad times in ministry, but for me, it has always been positive. Every experience that I've entered into has been one that has enriched me and which God has blessed. And so for me, it has been a career. That's why I'm still doing it. I love it. My kids say, why don't you retire and do what you want? I said, well, I am doing what I want. So ministry for me, looking back, was a calling, but it was a calling for my wife as well. I couldn't have done it without her. And she made so many sacrifices for it. So when I look back, I could just say, hey, without her companionship and her support, I wouldn't have been able to do it. You know. And my kids would say, we saw that passion in you. My granddaughter, the little one, the youngest one, is so passionate about Jesus. She's online with all her friends now, telling them all about Jesus and telling them about her papa. And so I'm proud of her too. So those are positive things in ministry. Thank you.
So where do you see this church, Calvary, going?
Calvary is at a crossroads in its life together. And how we get through the next few months and years will really, in my opinion, dictate where this church is going to go, whether it's going to be effective and powerful for the future. And it really depends on the willingness of those who carried this church for years to pass the baton to a younger generation. The younger generation needs to be very grateful for what they are receiving because they've received a rich heritage. But the generation that has carried this church year after year after year for decades now is tired and aging, and they need to trust a new people, a new generation, people like yourselves, to really pick up the torch and the baton and run with it. And you know what? They can do it, but it will not be the same.
Well, that brings me to my last question. So how can church members encourage their pastors and staff?
Actually, a pastor, and this is important, when I look back at all the churches I pastored, the church that encouraged me and loved me the most was probably the smallest. But every Christmas, they had the wise men. One was the treasurer, one was the chairman of the board, and one was the moderator of the church. They would collect an offering for us. And they would come on Christmas Eve, knock at our door, and give us a love gift. at our birthdays of Marlene and mine, they took time to celebrate our birthdays. When our children came along, they had celebrations of birthdays for them that they remembered as well. A pastor is successful in ministry not because he's gifted, but because the congregation loves him or her.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Cool, thank you.